All right, and this is Andrew Kraft here. We've just been watching for about the last hour what was just a beautiful ceremony there at Windsor Castle, bringing in my colleague, Rain Augustine, in Orlando, Florida, who was watching it with me. Rain, I was kind of struck by the eloquence, the grandeur of Windsor Castle, especially St. George's Chapel, and yet, you know, only 30 family members could be there, not even a full choir, not even a full, procession of clergy as well. And so the coronavirus has made this royal funeral look so different. We also knew that the royal family was urging members of the public there in the UK not to come out in droves to Windsor and just to donate to charities instead. So this was a very pared down, intimate and somber service.
Very much pared down and intimate, and as you mentioned, very striking images. But you know what wasn't pared down, Andrew? I was just overwhelmed at the large military presence. I mean, very detailed and choreographed a tribute that they paid to Prince Philip. They had close to 800 servicemen and women. That really stood out to me. And I think you were explaining a little bit earlier the royal military tie that Prince Philip has to the Royal Navy.
That's right. I mean, he served with the Royal Navy in World War II. He was a commander at one point in time of the Grenadier Guards and the Royal Marines. And I think for Americans, the Grenadier Guards, Rain, are the military members who kind of wear the funny hats outside Buckingham Palace. That's what that force is. And so Prince Philip was deeply steeped in the armed forces there in Great Britain. And you saw the family, and I hope we do have some of those shots from earlier. I'm just going to take us full here. We're going to bring in some of our guests as well that we have standing by. And let's just watch right now as the family leaves St. George's Chapel. There's the Queen there. And as you know, Rain, she was married to Prince Philip for 73 years. Prince Philip serving as the longest consort. Essentially what that means is, spouse, longer than Prince Albert with Queen Victoria. That was kind of the last funeral of the consort was the Queen Mother back in 2002, the Queen's mother, that would be Philip's mother-in-law. There you see the royal limousine, the Queen now being driven off the grounds of Windsor. And we are going to try this again with our guests, and bear with us. We've been having some audio difficulties, but we're bringing in again Nicoletta Gulace. She studies European history. She's been watching this all unfold for about the last hour, and there we're seeing Kate Middleton, Prince William there, speaking with the Archbishop of Canterbury. Nicoletta, do we have you?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, great. And what were your initial reactions today? What were your main takeaways?
Well, I just thought it was overwhelming. The beauty of the military service, the extraordinary ability of a choir of four, that space. But I also my heart was breaking for William and Harry. And I think a lot of Britons have been looking at this as a potential moment of healing, and I didn't see that necessarily taking place.
And Nicoletta, you saw there in St. George's Chapel how spaced out they sat, even though it was 30 people, 30 family members. That part was not intimate. They weren't sitting as a family would normally sit together, and we've seen that in funerals for the past year, not just for royalty, but the coronavirus pandemic has really made it hard for families to grieve, none less than the British royal family here more than a year after the pandemic began. And there we're just looking at scenes right now of the family leaving. But let's go back to that. As you know, we have been documenting here in the States the rift between Harry and William, and you saw their cousin walking in the middle. They weren't even walking side by side.
Yes, I agree. I think on some level, COVID gave people a bit of cover. The family could be spaced out. It was deemed appropriate for Anne's son to walk between the Harry and William, the brothers. And I did just see, out of the corner of my eye on your footage, a little exchange of words between the two of them. And we know at this point that I think Kate Middleton is really hoping he broke her a peace. I think she must be suffering from the unhappiness of her husband and from her beloved brother-in-law not being together. So we can only hope that this will bring healing. But I think the distance in the church helped everyone focus on the Duke of Edinburgh. And in some ways, the Queen's isolation was a symbol of what it means for her now to go forward for the rest of her life, which probably won't be terribly long, without her beloved Prince Philip.
Yeah, great points there. I wanted to bring in my colleague Rain Augustine yet again, and she's been watching this. They couldn't have asked for a more beautiful day to see off their beloved grandfather, father, and spouse there in Windsor, right near the River Thames. And we wanted to bring in Sam Turnberry, who is there in London with us, and he's going to give us the reaction of the public there. We already reported, Sam, that the family was asking the public not to come out in droves because of pandemic restrictions. But you saw still this scores of flowers laid out in front of Buckingham Palace, in front of Windsor Castle, and the like. And so kind of give us a sense of what the local reaction has been like. I know we're a week past the announcement of his death.
Yeah, I think, as you say, the royal family were very keen not to bring out people en masse around the royal palaces. And I think, by and large, people have respected that. We haven't seen large gatherings at Windsor today or at Buckingham Palace during the week, but there have been an exceptional number of floral tributes at all the palaces, which I think have been collected and taken to Windsor, where they were inspected by Prince Charles and Camilla earlier in the week. I think generally, I think especially reflecting on the service today, I think it was a really fitting tribute to Prince Philip, and I think it was really quite touching.
And Sam, you mentioned how you think it was largely respectful for the public to hold off on public gatherings and paying respect in the public. How do you think things would have went if we weren't in the middle of a global pandemic? How would the Commonwealth pay tribute to this royal funeral?
Things would have been very, very different, and I think the plans for a non-COVID restrictive funeral included somewhere in the region of 800 different guests. There would have been members of royal families from across the world, across the Commonwealth, all in attendance here in Windsor or in London. So it would have been a very, very different event. And those of us that remember the last funeral, funeral for a member of the royal family, for the Queen Mother in 2002, will remember those scenes in the streets. Exceptional numbers of people would have gathered. So I think actually it's been quite nice, and I think Philip will have been very pleased with the way that the service went today. He was not a fan of all the fuss. He always believed that his role was simply to serve the Queen, and I think he will have been very pleased with the service today.
That's right, Sam. And
it's
we
interesting
heard time
because
and time
we are
again
not
from
only
Harry
hearing
and William's
from
statements that Philip would have just preferred for everyone to get on with it, in their words. You know, I want to bring in Nicoletta as well. We can get everyone's comments on this, but there is such a fascination here in the United States with the British royal family, and I want Nicoletta to kind of come in and kind of give us a sense of where does that fascination lie. As you know, more than 240 years ago, we fought a war over our deep loathing of the British royal family, and yet Where does that kind of stem from still today?
Well, I think that for many people in the United States, the British royal family is a source of fascination, partly because of their continuity. We're used to having presidents who come and go every 4 years or 8 years. We see massive changes in what people care about, people's allegiance. And yet the British royal, virtually everyone in Britain has had the Queen reign through their entire lives. And it gives the British a sense of continuity, not only to the royal family, but a sense of their own past, which I think is very profound. And I think Americans sense this profundity as something that we don't have. And I think we're fascinated by it, we're attracted to it, and we consume it tremendously in shows like Downton Abbey and things like that. We really can't get enough of that kind of tradition and what Americans would call class.
And Sam, I know we're going to bring everyone in here. We just lost our live pictures. We're going to get those back. I think we have them back right now. I wanted to get Sam's opinion, though, at the moment, too, about on the other side of that. Why do you think Americans are so fascinated? Is it just because maybe some people here kind of pine for a monarchy over a democracy? But and give us a sense of kind of the millennials' point of view on the British royal family at the moment. It's kind of somewhat fallen out of favor after the whole dust-up with Brexit, if you will.
I think you're right. I think it's slightly fallen out of favor, but there is really strong sentiment in the UK. There's a lot of love for the royal family across generations, actually. And yes, there are definitely issues, and especially in the last few months, we've seen a number of those all over the front pages of the tabloids. But as Nicoletta quite rightly pointed out, the monarchy is a source of stability for us, not only here in the UK, but also across the Commonwealth. Governments come and go, our prime ministers come and go. We've had many in the time that the Queen has been in power. But actually, she sits at the top of social society here in the United Kingdom. She sets a precedent of how we are expected to behave, and she really does bring that stability. I think also she brings a huge degree of unity. The royal family brings a huge degree of unity. It brings together the 4 nations of the United Kingdom, but also the 54 nations of the Commonwealth, and it connects us to the world. So it is a really powerful thing for us. I think that's from a symbolic perspective. I agree. I think there is a huge amount of fascination in the United States with the royal family, but for us, it's very much part of our DNA and the fabric of our country and of our kingdom.
And no doubt, Sam, I mean, the institution itself, more than 1,000 years old, the kings and queens of England buried in Windsor Castle, and now you'll have the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip there. 99 years. Let's talk about the man, though, his long, remarkable life. Kind of walk us through, and maybe we can bring Nicoletta into this conversation as well. He essentially was a royal in exile, if you will, from, you know, the royal families of Denmark and Greece. Isn't that right?
Yes, that is correct. He was apparently born on a table in a villa in Greece, and he had to be whisked out of the country at a very young age because the king of Greece was deposed. He went to school in France. He also spent some time in school in Germany, and then in 1933, when Hitler came to power, his Jewish schoolmaster had to flee, and he actually established the school Gordonston that Prince Philip was so enamored with as a young man. So he has lived a turbulent life, full of drama, and I think the royal family and his relationship with the Queen was the beginning of stability for that amazing young man. He also survived despite it all, and I think for people laying Philip to rest, he is also a symbol of that greatest generation and their terrific resilience, which contrasts greatly with all the drama that we've really been seeing from his children, from basically from the 80s and 90s forward. And so he really stood for duty and stability, even given his very difficult past.
And Nicoletta, we're just playing out some of the funeral from earlier we wanted to show just in case people missed it. But there was the Land Rover that everyone's been talking about. Prince Philip had such a deep involvement in the funeral arrangements and planning himself. And like Sam was saying, the Brightons have been kind of preparing for this moment for years because he was such a remarkable life, such a long life, 99 years at his passing. Nicoletta, can you kind of talk about the love story, the 73-year-long love story? We were kind of drawing parallels with Prince Albert, Queen Victoria, but he always was there, like you said, but walking a few paces behind.
Yes, it was really very romantic. When he graduated from Gordonston, he went to Dartmouth Naval College, and there was going to be a tour of the king and his wife and his two daughters, Margaret and Elizabeth, in 1939, and Philip was asked by his uncle to show them around. And apparently Elizabeth fell in love with him at first sight at that moment. And Prince Philip, like Prince Albert, was an extraordinarily handsome man, a German prince, and Elizabeth, like Victoria, fell head over heels in love with this amazing person. And I think the big difference, one of the big differences between Victoria and Elizabeth, is that when Albert died, Victoria fell to pieces. She withdrew from public life. She went into decades of mourning and didn't really emerge for a very long time. Whereas Queen Elizabeth is extraordinary in her primary commitment to duty. 8 days after the death of Philip, she had her first public event again, the retirement event for Lord Chamberlain Peel, who had actually been the man who helped Prince Philip plan this extraordinary funeral service. And it's amazing to think about how much time and effort Philip himself put into the planning of this service, right down to choosing the color of this modified Land Rover, which he helped design as a hearse, to make it match perfectly the color of British Land Rovers during the Second World War. So again, a homage to his military background. So his love of the military and his love of Elizabeth paralleled each other, and her love of him and her love of duty kind of paralleled each other as well.
And Sam, I'd like to bring you into the conversation right here because
I'm going to go out to my colleague, Rain Augustine. Rain, are you with us? I'm sorry there. We have you.
Hi, I'm with us.
Go ahead and ask Sam a question.
Can you hear me okay? Yes, I would like to bring Sam in right here because he spoke about something that really piqued my interest. When we were talking about the fascination that Americans have with the royal family, he said that, this is something that's ingrained in their DNA. And so I find it interesting how oftentimes we sensationalize the royal family, but these are real people, and Sam, you're in a period, or the Commonwealth and across the United Kingdom right now is in a period of mourning. How long do you think this will last?
I think it will last for a little while longer, and I think you raise a really good point that actually we do sensationalize the royal family, but they are just human beings like all of us. And I think the death of the Duke of Edinburgh came as a small surprise. Despite his age, he had been in hospital. We were all watching intently as he had his surgery and was taken out of hospital. We were told that he was well. We thought that was the end of that for the time being. So I think the news last Friday of his death was a small surprise, and I think a poignant reminder that these royals are ultimately human. It wouldn't be appropriate to put into question the Queen's health on a day like today, but it does raise the question of how long we will have Her Majesty in reign for in the coming years, and we want her to obviously live a very long and happy life. We're very much looking forward to her Platinum Jubilee next year. She'll be the first British monarch ever to celebrate a Platinum Jubilee. But for most of us, as you say, it's we don't know any different. We've always had Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip at the very top of British social society.
And no doubt,
something
Sam,
that was kind of a reality check for me is when Prince Charles called Prince Philip his dear papa. that really brought us down to earth and allowed us to realize that this is someone's father, this is someone's husband, and this is going to be the actually the first time that Queen Elizabeth sits on the throne without Prince Philip by her side.
Indeed, and that's just one of the many roles that the Duke of Edinburgh held in the UK and across the Commonwealth. He had thousands of patronages of charities. And I think actually we heard in the service a very touching tribute by the Garter Principal King of Arms of all of the different titles and positions and medals that he held. And I think that the most poignant of those was when he ended at the end and said that the husband of Queen Elizabeth, the most important role. And I think a role that he held very dear and was really his raison d'etre in his entire life.
And Sam, obviously, this is Andrew back here, but a lot of Americans, solidified their fascination with the British royal family from Netflix's popular drama, The Crown. No doubt many fans here across the pond. I wanted just to kind of touch on the ceremony like you were mentioning. We'll bring in Nicoletta back again as well, but there weren't any eulogies, and that was reported a couple days before, that no family would speak at the service itself. We heard hymns, passages from the Bible, and the like, and this kind of goes back to the fact that this was so long in the making, and yet it had to be kind of turned on a dime to abide by these coronavirus restrictions. Bringing back in Nicoletta right now, let's talk about the history that Prince Philip saw. I was reading had met or known at least almost 20 prime ministers, I believe 15 U.S. presidents. 99 years is a long time to see well over much of the 20th century.
Yes, he has seen a tremendous amount of history. I mean, he was only a very short way away from his 100th birthday. So he presided over an entire century on one of the, and he was related to nearly all the royal families of Europe. And in 1993, when the bodies of the Russian royal family were discovered, where the Bolshevik revolutionaries had killed them during the Russian Revolution, they identified those bodies of the Romanovs by checking them against Philip's DNA. Wow. Discovered, indeed, this was the family of the Tsar. And I find that extraordinary. You're reminded what a small world it was. He was also related distantly to Queen Elizabeth, his wife. And so he wove through history. He was related to many important historical figures, and he lived through the greatest dramas of the day and helped the Queen on many of her occasions, her trips. He traveled to the Commonwealth, and I think it is going to be very difficult for people to imagine what life will look like going forward without him. And it sadly, as Sam says, we don't want to dwell on the Queen's health at this point, but we couldn't help noticing that she looked like an old woman today in a way I haven't seen her look before, and that the end of an era is coming. It hasn't completely arrived, but someday it will. And this is in some ways a dress rehearsal for the funeral of the Queen that will probably happen in the next 10 years or so.
That's right, Nicoletta, inevitable nonetheless. Let's talk about, like you were mentioning, though, Prince Philip, and you have to really kind of step back and think about everything that he witnessed from World War II. I was reading that he was in Tokyo for the signing of the Japanese surrender. I was reading that he's visited more than 70% of the world's countries, just lots of mileage there that he's seen. So he was a man of the world, and yet he was known, though, as well for being somewhat politically incorrect. Speaking his mind got him into trouble countless times. And so that was some of the criticism we've seen leveled against his legacy, somewhat insensitive to some indigenous members of the Commonwealth on these foreign trips, saying some things that might have been a little irreverent.
Yes, and I think that this really gets back to some of the points Sam brought up earlier with the generational divide. in Britain to some level. While the Queen, I think, is massively popular across generations, there is some sense among particularly younger Britons and Britons of color about whether a monarchy is really the right sort of institution. Should Britons, in fact, revere the monarchy in the way they do? And Prince Philip himself was never really kind of transcended his times, I guess. He would say very rude things sometimes in the colonies. There was an occasion where he was at some state event in Australia. He met some Aboriginal leaders and he asked them, "Oh, do you gentlemen throw spears at each other anymore?" There was a famous trip to China in 1986 where he made all sorts of jokes about the Chinese basically being willing to eat anything with legs. And so these kinds of insensitive remarks that we really have shied away from today were quips that Prince Philip made throughout his life and didn't even at the end necessarily pull back on. So there's all kinds of books that are sort of humorous coffee table books of the gaffes of Prince Philip. On one hand, there are people, all sorts of people who perhaps push against the political correct, what they see as politically correct standards, who sort of embrace the fact that because he was the Duke of Edinburgh, he could get away with this. But there are others, particularly younger people and people of color, that thought that Philip really symbolized some of the kind of old-fashioned and somewhat racist views of the British monarchy. And so those things really came together with Harry and Meghan's Oprah interview, when they actually accused a senior member of the royal family and perhaps the royal family itself of racism. Immediately in Britain, everyone thought, oh yeah, Prince Philip, of course, but then they clarified that it wasn't necessarily him. So it leaves a lot hanging out there, unexplained, not fully acknowledged, not fully addressed. And I think this is one of the contentious issues that the royal family will have to deal with going forward. It can't just be a Prince Philip joke anymore.
And we are just playing some of these scenes here from the funeral itself. You can see there Prince Charles and his sister, Princess Anne, behind them, Prince Edward and Andrew. Sam, let's bring you in one more time. I was kind of curious, just for someone who is a resident of England, the BBC had this whole protocol in place for this situation. Were you watching when they announced it? What were your first reactions when you heard there last Friday?
I wasn't watching, but you're right. They had been preparing for this scenario for some time. They prepare for a lot of scenarios, actually. I think there was a gaffe many years ago of someone appearing on screen without the correct black attire for announcing the death of a royal family member. They knew exactly what they were doing. I actually, last Friday, found myself driving to get a COVID vaccination, and all of the billboards along the side of the motorway had been turned black to announce the death of His Royal Highness. So it has definitely been, and we saw it over the course of the last week across London. Billboards have been turned black. We've seen all flags across government buildings flown at half-mast for the entirety of the national mourning period. And we're very used at the moment to seeing Boris Johnson and the rest of the cabinet every single day for our coronavirus briefings. Of course, none of that has gone ahead this week. So it has been a particularly quiet week in London. It's been an unusual week. At the same time, we've just come out of a 3-month strict lockdown here in England. So that ended on Monday. There's been equally a large number of people that have been out enjoying the reopening of pubs and restaurants. And I think a lot of people raising a toast to His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh this week.
And Sam, for someone, I'm sure you've been to Windsor Castle. Give us a sense, give our viewers a sense of the experience, what it's like. It's just a sprawling complex, so much history there.
A sprawling complex, a massive estate, a real symbol, I suppose, of the monarchy, one of many royal palaces across the country. And today will have been, we saw the large numbers of military, as Rain said, that were there today. I think under usual circumstances, there would have been a huge number of people from the general public as well there today. And it's a shame that we weren't able to be there. I certainly would have been there myself if I could have been. So it's a shame that we are all stuck at home still. But yes, a fantastic big castle and a fantastic ceremony as well.
All right, and we're going to just keep following some of these scenes. We want to thank our guests for being with us here. I'm going to go out now to my colleague, Rain Augustine. She has a few questions, but we're going to go for about the next 40 or so minutes, just kind of recounting what we saw, playing some of these scenes. We have some live pictures that we just want to show everyone on the screen. We have a beautiful live look of the skyline there in London. You can see the Shard, the Eye there. And we do have a live picture right outside Buckingham Palace. Not too many people out and about. Sam, what time is it there?
It's currently 4:20 here in London in the afternoon.
Late in the afternoon on
coronavirus restrictions still very much in place, prohibiting people from gathering in large groups. I was down at Buckingham Palace earlier this week, and the police were there trying to discourage people from gathering and leaving flowers and taking flowers to be sent off to Windsor Castle. But yes, I think a quiet London today, and not the usual crowds that we would expect for a state funeral.
All right, and Rain, I know you had a few more questions that you wanted to ask.
Absolutely. First off, these are just really live and striking pictures. I feel as though I am in the United Kingdom right now as we continue to recap the funeral services for Prince Philip. And, you know, I'm really just thinking about the man behind the royal glass, Andrew. I've heard so many things. You brought up a point that he has witnessed so much history, and I remember seeing him kind of have conversations and fun and make fun at United States presidents. So it seems like Prince Philip was a really fun guy, and I've also heard that he was full of compassion. Nicoletta, maybe you can comment on this, but I've heard reports that whenever Princess Diana died, the Queen was kind of getting a lot of pushback for being a little too cold, stoic, maybe a little too royal. And I'm actually hearing that Prince Philip is the one that encouraged Queen Elizabeth to make that public commentary that she made ahead of Princess Diana's funeral.
Oh, you're absolutely right. The death of Princess Diana was a dreadful moment for the monarchy. They were on vacation in their Scottish castle at Balmoral, and the Queen did not make a public announcement, and the public itself was devastated by the death of Diana. Had absolutely huge shock value in Britain. The mountains of flowers outside of Buckingham Palace was immense, and still the Queen didn't seem to do anything. And Prince Philip was the one who said, look, you've got to make a statement, and we have to put our best foot forward. So despite the fact that Diana was divorced from Prince Charles, that there had been a whole scandal, that actually she had had a very public interview where she talked about her troubles with the royal family, an interview that many of the things she said were echoed by the things that Meghan said in March on Oprah. But Prince Philip also really was the one who reached out to his grandsons and took them in hand. And they weren't sure what to do. They were devastated. They were so upset. And they didn't know how they could participate in the funeral, or if they wanted to walk behind the carriage as part of the cortege. And he said to them, boys, if you don't walk behind the carriage, you'll feel bad about it later. I will walk with you. Will you walk if I walk with you? And they said yes. And so the most enduring memory I think many of us have of Princess Diana's funeral in 1997 is this image of these little boys. Harry was 13, William was 15. Harry had his head bowed the whole time, and there was Prince Philip, tall, strong, erect, and you could practically feel the warmth he exuded towards them as the three of them, along with Diana's brother, walked together behind the hearse. It was a most moving moment, and I think Philip's intervention helped really salvage the monarchy from these accusations of carelessness. And I think the Queen and all of the royal family have tried to be very careful not to misstep since, and have generally tried to at least administer compassionate statements when occasions seem to require it. And I think it has played well, and I think this was a move initiated by Prince Philip.
And it sounds like you're saying that was kind of a pivotal moment, almost a change in the way that history was written, especially as we draw these parallels compared to the tension that was going on in the royal family back then during the time of Princess Diana's death, and even now between Prince Harry and Prince William.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think one thing we can say for the royal family is they know how to do pageantry. So there's no moment that they're going to look better than at a wedding or a funeral or a baptism. So I think punctuating these difficult moments with a display of what it is that makes them so special in Britain is actually, from a publicity point of view, a good move. And it really brings people together. And I think, as Sam has correctly noted, it's a great shame that people, because of coronavirus, weren't able to gather together. Because these moments of gathering outside of Windsor Castle or outside of Buckingham Palace for, a wedding or a funeral or whatever event are moments where the British public, Tory and Labour and everyone else, comes together. So I think actually the televisation of this funeral was beautifully done. We saw a lot of the architectural detail of Windsor. We saw the very moving marching bands and processions. We had some cameos of the grief of all the actors who have lost their beloved grandfather, father, and husband. And that was very, very well done. So I think these punctuating moments are essential for keeping up the mystique of the royal family and keeping allegiance to the royal family in Britain.
Absolutely.
And I had a couple more questions as well. We want to thank our guests for being with us here on this Saturday as we recap the funeral here of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. We will air that funeral live in its entirety again just after our live coverage ends here, and we want to thank my fellow digital journalist Rain Augustine. Just want to show you some of these beautiful shots. Want to reset here, but live shot of Buckingham Palace there in London. Late afternoon on that Saturday. We have a beautiful live look of the London skyline as well, and still some crowds, very small though, are gathering still outside the gates to Windsor Castle. Want to put that up once again. Sam, let's bring you back in. I had a question as well, because we know back in 2017, Prince Philip formally retired from his official duties. It was a sad occasion for the palace especially, but also for many Brightons as well. My question though to you, what do Brightons think about, will the Queen kind of follow suit as she gets up there in age? She'll be 95 in June, and kind of, the King in waiting, Charles, will kind of step in more to a formal role. Do you see that happening at any time?
That's a very good question, Andrew. I think it's a closely knit secret in the royal family as to what the plan is. There was speculation that the Queen would step down before her Platinum Jubilee, and that she would hand over the reins to Prince Charles to become king, a role that he's been waiting to do for some very long time now. Yeah. But actually the announcement that we are going ahead with our extended 4-day bank holiday weekend next year, we're having a range of celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, has kind of quashed those suspicions for the moment. It remains to be seen next year what will actually happen. But right now, I think the only people that know that are the Queen herself and her closest advisors.
No, very, very true there. And as we know, I think it's called Operation London Bridge, her funeral arrangements, her funeral plans. And we won't dwell on those. We don't want to dwell on that. But you could arguably make the case that those plans are much, much more involved and extreme than the ones we saw for Prince Philip today. But going back to Prince Philip, there has been a part of his life that I find interesting we haven't yet talked about, and that is his passion for the environment, his passion for conservation. He served as the president of the World Wildlife Fund, and this was kind of a cause célèbre for him, wasn't it, Sam?
It was indeed. It was a personal passion of his. He worked for a long time on a number of environmental issues, spanning the range of his career, and he was instrumental in actually playing a part in bringing faith into the environmental cause and set up a big organization called Faith Invest to bring faith and environmental issues together to create funding opportunities. He's been actually patronage to a lot of different charities across the United Kingdom. I think perhaps his longest lasting legacy will be the Duke of Edinburgh's award, a now international award that he's lent his name to and founded, I think in the 50s, which is pretty much a rite of passage for every child going through secondary school here in the United Kingdom to go out and do an expedition across the great British countryside, do volunteering and learn more about service to our community and to our society. And he'll leave a fantastic legacy in the Duke of Edinburgh's award and all the other organizations that he has been a patron to over the years.
And Sam, let's also talk about the fact that how these kind of scandals in the last few years, especially here in the U.S., how are they received in the UK? I'm talking about not only, Brexit with the Sussexes, and now they've decamped to California, but also Prince Andrew and his kind of, frankly, seedy involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. We were learning earlier that it was confirmed no member of the royal family will wear military uniforms. We saw that they didn't wear any military uniforms to avoid embarrassment, possibly following Prince Harry's departure and Prince Andrew's stepping down. Previously, they had both served in quite high positions. I believe Andrew was Vice Admiral in the Royal Navy and Harry was Captain General of the Royal Marines. Do those scandals still linger today? And do people are they on the minds? Are they front and center still?
They are indeed, and actually in the week of national mourning that we've had over this week, the government and the palace have not been releasing any official statements really, apart from the necessary information for the funeral today. So I think that's driven a lot of speculation in the tabloids this week around who's going to be attending, what's going to be happening. And of course, it's the first time that we've seen the core members of the royal family together in one room for some time now. So there was always a lot of speculation around how today was going to go and what it was going to look like. These scandals are always front of mind. I think, as Nicoletta said, there's still a lot of public admiration for the royal family generally, and there are certain members of the family that are more loved than others. I think it's easy to say, and that's kind of a conflicting thing in the mind of most British people, is how do you balance the people in the royal family that you really like and the ones that perhaps you don't like? So it's a constant source of conversation. It's been especially true this week. I actually think it was really touching to see the whole family together, separated, of course, by COVID restrictions in St. George's Chapel. Nothing more important than keeping them all safe, especially the Queen, and free of coronavirus. But I think it was touching to see them all together today.
And Sam, was Prince Philip kind of instrumental in keeping all of that together, making sure things didn't fall apart, essentially?
Yes, indeed. He was instrumental, a bit of a visionary actually, in pushing the royal family and the monarchy into the 21st century. He brought cameras into Buckingham Palace for the first time. In fact, as I think Rain alluded to earlier, many of you will have seen the Crown, and although it is a fictional series, lots of that is true, and we do see lots of the Duke of Edinburgh rather, his involvement in bringing the royal family into the 21st century. As Nicoletta said as well, how he manages the PR for the royal family was always really important. So yes, a bit of a visionary, a bit of driving the royal family forwards, and I think we'll look now to see who fills that void in the household in the coming year.
And we are just playing some more of the ceremony itself. Like I said, here on NewsNOW from Fox, we will play out for you the entire ceremony right after our live coverage here ends. Going to go out now to Rain Augustine, my colleague there in Orlando, Florida. Rain.
Sam, you bring up an interesting point. You can't talk about the royal family without talking about the royal drama, because at the end of the day, yes, there is a lot of pageantry involved. However, a lot goes on behind the scenes that we just don't know about. And, we don't just sensationalize the royal family in our minds. We have also seen them been played out on TV, on the small and on the big screen. I'm sure maybe you all are familiar with The Crown. I don't know, maybe Nicolette or Sam, can one of you weigh in and maybe tell us, is the TV character, does that match the Prince Philip that you all know? Kind of separate fact from fiction from us if you can.
Well, I would say that the Duke of Edinburgh is exceptionally portrayed in the 4 seasons of The Crown that we've all loved so much. I think there is an awful lot of creative flair that has been added to the storytelling. There's definitely a lot of conversations that no one would have been privy to that are relayed in the series. And I think Harry has himself said that it is a work of fiction. But there are a lot of elements of truth to it, and the actors and actresses that were involved in creating it spent a very long time studying all available footage and biographies that they could for the characters. So I think there is an element of truth, and I think that actually watching those 4 seasons of The Crown that we've seen so far has potentially also changed some of public perception here in the UK around our royals. I think the struggle that we saw Prince Charles go through when he was I don't want to say made, but brought into marrying Diana, potentially against his will, potentially takes some of the edge off of what happened. But I wouldn't like to speculate too much. But I think there's an element of truth. I'm not sure what Nicoletta would think.
Yes, I think especially for Americans, watching The Crown was like looking into a sort of crystal ball of the royal family. The royal family is so opaque and hard to read. They're so reticent with their public statements. And we glean this and that from them when we hear about tabloid headlines and such. And what the Crown tried to do is take the historical moments that we do know about and then recast them as a sort of docudrama, if you will, of their lives. And I agree that the casting and acting of the Prince Philip characters was really splendid. They got a sense of his vitality, his force, and the way in which he cowed Prince Charles a bit. And it's interesting because the royal family, including Prince Philip, would always insist that they don't watch The Crown. But when Prince Harry was asked who would like to play him, he said he'd like Damian Lewis. So Damian, please, do this for us. So some of the royals are watching, at least out of the corner of their eye. And it is giving us, yes, a very different perspective, a lot of it imaginative, as Sam says, because we're imagining their internal world in a way that they never reveal to us. But it's putting it together in a very interesting piecing of the historical context.
Very interesting historical context indeed. And this all kind of reminds me of the paparazzi in the United Kingdom. We are sitting here offering commentary and we're doing special coverage on Prince Philip's funeral, but I think there are some interesting contrasts between the media in the United States and the media in the United Kingdom.
I can take a stab at this one. I think that the paparazzi really were made famous by their incessant harassment of Princess Diana. And part of it is because a good shot of the princess could go, it would be auctioned off to tabloids, and a photographer could make hundreds of thousands of pounds on a really compromising picture. And so the paparazzi were often independent photographers out there trying to get these pictures of the royal family. And most famously and most tragically, it was as the paparazzi chased Princess Diana and her boyfriend at that time, Dodi Al-Fayed, in their car through a tunnel in Paris, that the terrible crash happened that caused her death. And I think since then, clearly Harry has been very public about this, but other members of the royal family have had a real sort of animosity towards the paparazzi, as though they were sort of jackals just trying to feed off of their own personal lives. And this is difficult because the monarchy also has to negotiate with the press because it's reliant on good press coverage. So the royal family actually do have audiences with the press where they give them stories in the hope that this will stop them from sending the paparazzi chasing after them all the time. But it's only been sort of successful. And in some cases, particularly in the case of Meghan, who felt very, very angry about her press coverage, it's actually helped widen rifts and create rifts where they might not have been otherwise. So I'd be interested to hear Sam's take on this, though.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really, you raise a really good point, and I think it's been really interesting seeing the media coverage play out of Meghan, especially over the last few years. And I think there's this almost perception of what a perfect princess is supposed to look like, whatever that may be. And we didn't see that. Apparently, Diana meets that requirement. Camilla certainly didn't. And the way that those two individuals carried media coverage was exceptionally different. And we saw it again with Kate Middleton and with Meghan Markle. The coverage of Meghan Markle and Kate Middleton by comparison was so exceptionally different. And the way that they would cover very similar scenarios with the two different individuals, it was rather shocking. And we spoke earlier about Americans being obsessed with the royal family. I don't think anyone is more obsessed with the royal family than the British tabloids, and they'll sell the best story that they can, and they don't care how they get it. I think we're starting to see that change, though. I think we're starting to see very, very slowly that individuals, not just in the royal family, but also celebrities here in the UK, really taking a stand against coverage that they don't like in tabloid newspapers, and they're starting to win those legal battles. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out over the next few years and if that changes things.
It's interesting because when you mention the obsession that the public has with the royal family and how the paparazzi has harassed royal members like Princess Diana, I can't help but think about the mental health of being in the public eye, of being a royal family member. Nicoletta, what do you think about this?
Well, I think both Diana and Meghan have spoken explicitly about the mental health consequences of being under the public eye and being what they felt like was trapped within this institution of the monarchy, where their public and private behavior was under constant scrutiny. And we know Harry and William, who lost their mother at an early age, have also been quite frank about talking about things like mental health. And in fact, the Duke of Edinburgh wasn't entirely comfortable with this. He didn't see why everybody was talking about their mental health all the time. That wasn't really the kind of stiff upper lip environment he was brought up with. So I think he found it a bit difficult and a bit embarrassing. But I think these younger members of the royal, really following Diana's lead, have made mental health a central issue. And I think it has been a particularly healthy and salutary response this year, because we know how COVID-19 has negatively affected people's mental health, not just in the United States, but worldwide, and certainly in Britain, where people have been locked down, where one of their favorite institutions, the pub, we joke about this in the United States, but the pub is where you meet your friends, where you have a bite, sometimes where you work. If you don't have an office. And the idea of shuttering of these places of sociability has been so difficult for people. So that I think the forefronting by the younger royals of mental health issues may be one of the ways in which they've helped modernize the monarchy, and maybe one of the ways in which the monarchy can reach out to and touch the newer generation.
I do want to just go back. Let's bring the conversation a little back to the ceremony itself and what we were seeing. We're playing out some of that right now there, St. George's Chapel. Nicoletta or Sam, I think the part to me that was so moving was God Save the Queen at the very end of the ceremony, the British national anthem. Maybe, Sam, you could offer some thoughts. When you were watching it, it kind of felt like, for those Americans or for our viewers, who have lost a grandparent, Britain has essentially lost a grandparent in the passing of Prince Philip. Do you think a lot of people feel that way, think that way, or what? Kind of give us a sense of the standing of the royal family amongst the British public itself.
Yeah, I echo that. It's a really, really good way of phrasing it. It does feel a little bit like we've lost a grandfather today. As I think I mentioned before, most of us have lived our entire lives with the Queen and Prince Philip in reign, and yes, that definitely is echoed in today's ceremony. I think actually the funeral itself, and I think Nicoletta may have mentioned this earlier, was heavily choreographed by the Duke of Edinburgh himself, and actually it was a deeply moving personal ceremony. I suppose if you're watching it over in the States and you're not familiar with the royal family, you may not have picked up on some of the references that were made. There were hymns that were sung, for example, Eternal Father, which is all about seafaring tradition, or in fact Psalm 104, which I think was sung at the Duke's 75th birthday. Lots and lots of references to his entire life, and it was a very personal ceremony. And if you're familiar with the royal family and you're familiar with how the last 50 years have been, then you will have spotted that in today's ceremony. And I think that's what made it so touching, really.
That's right, Sam. We even saw the late Duke's gloves, his riding hat, on the chair in St. George's. Just deeply, deeply personal touches, and in these, funerals like this that are such high profile, I always am looking for just emotional reactions amongst the family, amongst the guests. I also looked for those who are not attending, who were not there. And I know the coronavirus put a lot of problems in the guest list, but it's also noteworthy who could not be there.
Yes, indeed. I think to your first point around that emotional reaction, I think that you may struggle to see that today. I think to what Nicoletta was saying earlier, today is not just a normal funeral that many of us may have attended in the past. This is a public display of the monarchy. We're bringing them out into public. We want them to be loved and liked by the entire British population. They're that source of stability that we were talking about earlier. So we probably weren't likely to see many of that emotional reaction today. I think much of that will have occurred in private over the last week and probably continue to occur in private over the next week. The royal family indeed are in a second week of national mourning next week, which is not a government or national mourning separately to that. So I think a lot of that will happen in private. And yes, the guest list severely restricted. There was a lot of debate over whether that number would be kept to, but 30 is the limit here in the UK. It's the legal limit for the number of guests that can attend a funeral. And I think it was good actually to see the royal family adhering to that limit. They are part of the British citizenship, and as much as they might be at the top of it, they're subject to the same rules that we're all subject to. So I think it was a very carefully considered guest list. The key members of the royal family, and also importantly the inclusion of a few members of Prince Philip's family on the German side. So that would be my take on it.
And Sam, one of the main plot lines in The Crown, as you know, Philip was not only spouse, but he was also subject to his sovereign, and he was such a strong-willed personality, a man of purpose, and so the Queen, Her Majesty, had to find essentially responsibilities, duties, so he could maintain that sense of purpose. One of which I thought was interesting was maintaining the royal households, the royal properties. What did you make of that? Can you kind of go into what those are, where those are, and Nicoletta could come in with that too?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we see in The Crown when Queen Elizabeth ascends to the throne, a lot of frustration in the acting of the portrayal of Prince Philip, about having to lose his military career. He had gone up the ranks. He was a lieutenant and then a commander in the Navy, one of the highest ranks in the Navy, and I think he wanted to stay in that. And we saw a little bit of frustration, I suppose, if any of you have watched The Crown, but actually, especially considering that he was a naturalized British subject, he took to his role like a duck to water, and he was absolutely lived a life of service to the Queen and to the British citizenship. I think, yes, he did take a massive role in overseeing the royal households. There are a number of them. I suppose the key ones that you'll be familiar with are Buckingham Palace, which is the key home of the Queen and the royal family. Kensington Palace, where a number of the royal family have lived, for example, the home of William and Kate, out into Windsor Castle, as we've seen today, and up in Balmoral, as Nicoletta said, the country home up in Scotland. We also have Holyrood House in Edinburgh, which is the home of the throne up in the capital of Scotland, and Sandringham, of course, where the Queen spends a lot of her time. So a huge estate here in the UK. And yes, one of the Prince Philip's central roles was to coordinate that and look after that.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. It was an enormous job keeping it together. And we also know that Prince Philip himself was very fond of Sandringham and spent a lot of time there, particularly after he retired. And one of the interesting details about this funeral is that Philip will be put in the crypt at Windsor, but when the Queen dies, the two of them together will be moved to a chapel at Sandringham, where they will be reinterred together. And you were talking earlier about sort of their romance. You're talking now about the incredible properties and estates. And it is interesting the way they've thought about being together, not just during their lifetime, but in death as well. And the maintenance of these crown estates, particularly this favorite, Sandringham, is very important.
Going to bring in my colleague again, Rain Augustine. She has no doubt more questions on this truly spectacular day. We're being joined by Sam Turnberry and Nicoletta Gulace there to offer some of these just great commentary, great analysis, great context on what's truly a historic day, not only for the residents of Great Britain and the United Kingdom, but also for most of the Commonwealth countries as well. And here in the United States, the United Kingdom, Great Britain is no doubt our closest ally, and so we've been airing this live very early this morning. Most of the American media networks have, and just stunning scenes, somber scenes. You've been seeing Queen Elizabeth kind of isolated and remote, sitting alone there in St. George's Chapel in black, mourning, and the rest of the family. And Rain, wanted to get your just final thoughts. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left of our live coverage here, but just kind of recap and final thoughts.
You know, Andy, it's definitely a historic day, and I'm looking at these live pictures right now, and I just cannot help but focus on the detail and the choreography that we all are seeing. It seems like these are traditions that have been around a very long time in the monarchy, and you're right, we've talked about everything from the services itself. We've talked about Prince Philip. We've talked about the business of the royal family and how they kind of juggle pageantry when it comes to intimate family affairs and putting on a front for the public. And we've covered a lot of ground here, but I think the most important thing to remember that this is definitely a celebration of life, and we are remembering and paying homage and respect to Prince Philip, just as everyone in the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth are. And I'm so glad that we had Nicoletta and Sam on to offer such amazing insights and commentary. As an American, my mind is just blown by how much of a historical significance this one royal ceremony is having across the world. And here on NewsNOW from Fox, we think we have about 2,000 viewers right now on our social media platforms. Of course, we reach up to 4 million viewers daily. So I hope that the viewers are tuning in and enjoying the commentary and reflecting on the life as Prince Philip as much as we are, because I think that we are really enjoying such a historic and significant moment.
Yeah, and let's just kind of recap, reset where we are. Prince Philip dying at the age of 99 just last Friday, Rain. And tributes been pouring in throughout that time all week from people in Great Britain, prime ministers around the world, former presidents, President Biden and the like, and all kind of coming to a culmination this afternoon in St. George's Chapel there at Windsor Castle on a beautiful sunny day in what is no doubt a celebration of a very, very long life, 99 years old. And we just want to bring in Sam and Nicoletta for final thoughts. Nicoletta, I'll start with you. What were your kind of main takeaways, main observations on this truly historic day there in London?
Well, I think for me, the most important thing is that it brought back together the whole family, as Sam had mentioned. It brought back William and Harry. And the Duke of Edinburgh, despite being deceased, was very present in his medals, his sashes, his hats. They could all feel his presence, and hopefully this moment will allow some healing to take place within the royal family. I think Britons would like that, and I actually think all of us in the United States that follow the royal family would like to see that as well.
And Sam, if you're still with us, we'll go to you just for final thoughts from someone who is a member of the Commonwealth, a resident who's been following this, who's lived this, really. What does it mean for you today? And kind of give us a sense of, your contemporaries, family, friends. What does it mean for them today?
Well, I think, as Nicoletta said earlier, it's the beginning of the end of an era, really, of the second Elizabethan age that we've all lived through, an exceptional period of change for society, for the United Kingdom, for the Commonwealth, and for the royal family. And as what will be interesting to see over the next few years is how the younger members of the royal family take the royal family into a new generation. We're all very keen to see what the role of Prince Charles will look like now that the Duke of Edinburgh has retired and then, of course, passed away last week. So I think a moment of reflection, a moment of gratitude, really, for the many great things that the Duke of Edinburgh has done across his life, and a moment of thanks, really.
All right, well, we do want to just thank you guys so much for being with us on this day, on this Saturday, as we brought you those live pictures, the funeral of Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, in its entirety. And like I've been saying, Rain, for about the last couple of hours here, we are going to air the ceremony again on the stream for those who might have missed it or who just want to watch it again and see, Queen Elizabeth and her children and her grandchildren mourn their grandfather, father, and spouse, but also celebrate his life. And here on News Now from Fox, we want to thank you for watching, and we're going to go to a quick commercial break. Rain, any final thoughts?
I've just enjoyed the coverage, especially with you, Andrew. Thank you so much. And also a huge thank you to our guests for offering such amazing insight.
All right, and that's going to do it. And, like Sam said, really the end of an era there in the United Kingdom today. So I want to thank you for being with us on behalf of myself and Rain Augustine for News Now from Fox. We're going to go to a quick commercial. We're going to leave you with some great, beautiful scenes there on a very, very sunny day in London.
Beautiful.
Buckingham Palace right there. Windsor Castle as well. And the beautiful London skyline. You can kind of make out the River Thames there. We'll see you back here in 2 minutes on News Now from Fox.